Relax and listen to the voice. Hello everyone. In this installment, we're going to read you some urban myths. Stories that have been passed down from friends and families, maybe generation to generation. Stories from around certain areas in the country. These are the kinds of stories that your older brother and sister would tell you to try to scare you when you were a little kid. Here we go. There was a woman who lived in a small house in the suburbs of a big city. She wasn't married and she lived alone, with only her big dog to keep her company. The dog was a Doberman. One evening, the woman came home from work and found her dog choking on something. It was lying on the living room floor and gasping for air. The woman dropped her purse and ran over to the dog, trying desperately to clear the dog's throat, but she had no luck. Concerned about her pet's welfare, she immediately loaded her pet into the car and drove him to the nearest veterinarian's office. The veterinarian examined the Doberman right away and said that he would probably have to operate in order to remove the obstruction in the dog's windpipe. He told the woman to go home and that he'd call her later to let her know how things went. And all the while, the dog was laying on the ground, still gasping for air and growing weaker by the minute. The flustered woman went straight home. As she was closing the front door behind her, she got a call on her mobile phone. It was the veterinarian, and something seemed to be seriously wrong. "Listen carefully," he said in an urgent tone. "You need to get out of the house right now. Go to your neighbor's place and wait for the police to arrive. I've called them already. Go now." Shocked and frightened, the woman wasted no time and ran straight out the front door. A few minutes later, a police car arrived with its siren blaring. The policemen got out and explained that they had to search the house. They entered through the front door, with their guns drawn. The woman was absolutely speechless. She had no idea what was happening or why. As she watched the last of the policemen disappear into her house, she decided to call the veterinarian and ask him what was going on. "Yes, well, you see, I managed to clear the obstruction in your dog's throat," the veterinarian said. "When I found out what he was choking on, I called the police. Your dog was choking on 3 human fingers." After the police had searched the home, they found a masked man in the woman's bedroom closet. He was armed with a knife and cowering in pain, clutching his bloody right hand, which was missing 3 fingers. There's a strange photograph that shows 2 children standing next to a corpse with a decapitated head. This is the Buckley family. The children's names were Susan and John. As a Halloween joke, the kids in the neighborhood were going to get a dummy and pretend to chop its head off. The Buckley children, however, thought it would be hilarious to actually kill their mother, so when the kids walked up to the door, they got an axe and they slaughtered her. Once everyone figured out what they had done, they called the police, but the kids were long gone by then. The only picture of them was this photo, taken by a trick-or-treater. They say that later, the mother's body was found half-eaten. This photograph has been posted on various sites on the internet with this accompanying text, but it's not true. Here is the real story. The image is actually called Midwestern Matricide, and it's the work of Eddie Allen from Haunted Memories. He retouches old photographs and gives them a horrifying twist. In this case, he took a normal photo of 2 children and their mother and made it look like they had murdered her. If you search it out and look at the original photograph, you will see that the mother's head is still on her shoulders, and the daughter is not holding an axe, and the son is not holding his mother's severed head. A few years ago, an email did the rounds, warning people about a cunning serial killer who used a terrifying trick to lure his victims out of the safety of their homes and into his clutches. One night, a middle-aged woman was sitting at home, reading the newspaper. Her husband worked nights, which meant that she was often alone in the house. It was getting late, and she was about to go to bed when she heard a strange noise outside. It sounded like a crying baby and seemed to be coming from the bushes outside of her front door. The woman thought that this was very strange, but was tempted to go out and investigate. Just then, her dog jumped to its feet and began barking and growling at the door. The woman got a very strange and uneasy feeling. She stopped in her tracks and decided to call the police instead. When she told the police that she had heard the sound of a crying baby, the police said, "We will be right over. Whatever you do, do not open your door." The lady hung up the phone, checked to make sure her door was locked, and minutes later, she heard the sound of sirens as 2 police cars pulled into her driveway. One policeman banged on her door, while the other searched the bushes outside of her home. The woman opened up her front door and let the policeman in. He was holding a doll in his arms, and she noticed that it had a tape recorder taped to its belly. The policeman pressed play on the tape recorder, and they both heard the same sound that she had heard before, the sound of a crying baby. The officer explained that there was a serial killer on the loose who was targeting women who were alone at night. The killer was using a cunning trick to fool the women into opening their front doors and coming outside. He would hide in the bushes and play a tape recording of a crying baby. The recording of the baby's cries would make the women think that there was a child in need of help, and they would come out of their homes. While they were looking for the source of the cries, the killer would then emerge from the bushes and murder them. The officer said that in the past few days, they had received several calls from women saying that they had heard a crying baby outside their homes when they were alone at night. According to the officer, the serial killer had already murdered 2 women in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He went on to say that if it hadn't been for the woman's dog warning her of the danger, she very well could have been his next victim. While the police have never actually come across a real-life case like this email was inspired by an episode of America's Most Wanted that theorized that a serial killer in Louisiana may have been using the crying baby trick to lure and fool one of his victims. Years later, an episode of Criminal Minds also mentioned a serial killer using the crying baby lure. There was a woman who lived somewhere in this town who'd bought a pet snake from the pet store. It was a 12-foot-long Burmese python. She lived alone in a small house with her young son, and she kept the snakes in a tank in the living room. The pet snake had a habit of escaping from its tank, and after a while, the woman began to feel guilty about keeping such a large reptile in such a small, confined space. Due to this, she would often take the snake out of its tank and allow it to roam freely about the house. Her little son loved the pet snake and often brought it out into the garden to play with it. One morning, the woman noticed that the pet snake had stopped eating. 3 days passed, and the snake still hadn't touched any of its food. The woman began to get worried that there was something wrong with the snake, so she picked up the phone and called the veterinarian. "Is it normal for a snake to suddenly stop eating?" she asked. "Well, it depends," said the vet. "In the wild, snakes often have to survive for long periods of time without any food. Sometimes they starve themselves in preparation for a big meal. Pet snakes can also get bored with what you're feeding them. They like a change of food now and then." The woman took the vet's advice and bought a new type of food for her pet, but the snake still refused to eat anything. Not long afterwards, the woman woke up in the middle of the night to find her pet snake laying in bed beside her. It was sleeping stretched out, completely straight on the bed. Thinking that this was a little strange, she picked it up and put it back in the tank. A few days later, her son was playing with the snake in the garden. The woman was washing dishes in the kitchen when she happened to glance out the window. Her son was lying down on the grass, and the snake was lying next to him, stretched out and stiff as a board. At seeing this for the second time, the woman became convinced that the snake was dying. She once again grabbed the phone to call the veterinarian's office. "Hey there, it's me again. My pet snake still isn't eating," she said. "Well, I don't think there's anything to worry about," replied the vet. "Just keep an eye on it, and if it still isn't eating by the end of the month, bring it into my office." "Oh yeah, there's something else," said the woman. "The other night, I found it lying in bed beside me. It was stretched out straight and totally rigid." "Oh no," said the vet with alarm. "You'll have to get rid of the snake as soon as possible. It will have to be put down." "Why? What's wrong with it?" asked the woman. "That's what snakes do when they're measuring you," he said. "Measuring me?" the woman asked. "Yes, measuring you. The snake was sizing you up in order to eat you," he replied. The horrified woman turned and looked out the window just in time to see her little son's feet disappearing down the snake's throat. One evening, a woman was leaving a busy shopping center. Her car was parked in a dark area of the parking lot. Carrying large bags of groceries, she walked to her car and fumbled for her keys. And suddenly, she felt a searing pain in her ankle, and she fell to the ground, writhing in agony. As she was laying on the ground, she looked into the eyes of a man as he crawled out from under her car. The man was clutching a bloody knife in his hand. He had cut her Achilles tendon, and she lay helpless on the ground, unable to walk. The man stole her purse, stole her keys and her car, and then drove off, leaving the poor woman on the ground, writhing and screaming in pain. In the late 1970s, this scary urban legend began to spread around America. Fears about the mall slasher were so acute that the police department had to set up a helpline. In the first week, they received hundreds of calls. Rumors began to spread that criminal gangs were attacking women by cutting their ankles to render them helpless and then cutting off one of their limbs. They said that in order to join the gang, the criminal had to show the leader a severed limb that they had taken from a victim. However, the slasher under the car is just an urban myth. Police have never come across a case like this, and as far as we're aware, criminal gangs don't do this kind of thing. You probably don't have to worry about criminals lurking underneath your car, but you should always be careful in mall parking lots or any other parking lots, because there have been a few cases where women were abducted while they were getting to their cars. There was also a case in 2011 when a man in Virginia was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison. They called him the Butt Slasher. He would sneak up behind teenage girls or young women at busy malls and shopping centers and slash their butts with a knife before disappearing into the crowd. None of the attacks caused serious injuries, but some victims required medical attention and were left with permanent scars. So whether you're in the parking lot or in the mall itself, you may need to watch your ass. A few years ago, there was a middle-aged woman who was very vain and would always wear her hair up in a big bun. She was very proud of her hairdo, and she thought she was the most fashionable of all her friends. She had no idea that the hairstyle that she wore had gone out of fashion many years before. The woman was very lazy and didn't like having to spend time cleaning and styling her hair. Instead, she just left her hair as it was and never took it down at all. In fact, she rarely even bothered to wash her hair. Whenever she took a shower, she would wear a shower cap to make sure that the water didn't mess up her hairstyle. At night, she would sleep with a towel wrapped around her head to make sure that none of her hair fell out of place. After a while, her hair began to smell. To mask the odor, she just put hairspray on it. And when her scalp started to feel itchy, she put more hairspray on it. Even though her head itched like crazy, all she did about it was apply even more hairspray. One morning, when she didn't come down for breakfast, the woman's husband went up to the bedroom to wake her up. To the man's horror, he discovered that his wife had died sometime during the night. At first, the police thought that she must have had a heart attack in her sleep because there wasn't a mark on her body. However, when the coroner's office was conducting their autopsy, they couldn't figure out what had killed the woman. Then, the coroner examined her hair and found something horrendous. A black widow spider had made its nest in her hair and laid eggs. When the baby spiders had hatched, they had chewed through the top of her skull and began to eat into her brain. There was once a woman who went to Mexico on vacation. She got bored of hanging around the resort hotel and decided to explore the town. After doing a little shopping and buying a few souvenirs, she happened to see a little dog trotting down a dusty alley between two buildings. The woman was immediately smitten with the cute little animal and followed it. When she caught up to the dog, she picked it up and it started licking her face. The dog didn't have any collar or any tags, so she assumed it was a stray. This animal was so adorable to the woman that she decided she was going to adopt it. It's illegal to transport animals back from Mexico to the United States, so on the journey back home, she hid the little dog under her sweater and pretended that she was pregnant. The guards at the border crossing never suspected a thing. Once the woman was back in the United States, she brought her new pet back to her apartment and gave it a bath. She then set out a bowl of food for the little dog to eat. She laid out a blanket in the kitchen for the creature to sleep on, and then went to a restaurant to have dinner with a friend. When she came home a few hours later and walked into the kitchen, she found her new pet chewing a hole through the wall. There was an oozing mucus around the animal's eyes, and it was foaming at the mouth. Afraid that her new dog might be sick, she wrapped it up in a blanket and let it sleep in her bedroom. The next morning, the woman woke up to find the creature gnawing on her ear. She screamed and pushed it away. The woman then realized that her new pet was seriously ill, and she took it to the vet. She sat impatiently in the vet's office, waiting for the vet to see her. As soon as the vet came out, the woman rushed over, carrying her pet in her arms. "There's something wrong with my dog," she said. The vet took one look at it and asked, I'm sorry, what did you say this was?" "Well, I'm not sure what breed it is," she replied. "I think it's some kind of rare Mexican breed." The vet stared directly at the woman with his mouth open, shook his head, and then finally replied, "Ma'am, this is no dog. This looks like a sewer rat." The woman was horrified. "A sewer rat?" she cried. "Yes," said the vet. "And even worse news is that this rat appears to have rabies." There was a middle-aged woman who was very obese and desperately wanted to lose weight. The woman had tried all sorts of fad diets, but none of them seemed to work for her. Exercise was out of the question because the woman was so obese that she could hardly even stand up, as well as simply being too lazy. And to top all of that off, she simply lacked the willpower to force herself to eat less. One day as she sat, she was leafing through a magazine when she came across an advertisement for diet pills. "Guaranteed weight loss in just 2 weeks," said the ad in bold red letters. The company was selling the diet pills over the internet, so the woman decided to order a 1-month supply. A few days later, she received the package in the mail. When she opened it, she was surprised to see that it only contained 12 large pills. The instructions said that she should take 1 pill per month with a glass of water, and afterwards she should avoid eating spicy foods or drinking alcohol. The woman popped one of the diet pills into her mouth and swallowed it down. A few days later, she noticed that her appetite had completely disappeared. She didn't feel hungry at all, and even though she didn't do any exercise, she was beginning to notice that she was shedding those pounds. As the days went on, she quickly began losing more and more weight. Within no time, she was up on her feet and admiring her slim new body in the mirror. The change that she saw was stunning. She had gone from being the shape of a pear to having an hourglass figure in no time at all. Unfortunately, the diet pills proved to be more effective than she had ever expected. Even though she was down to her target weight, she continued to get thinner and thinner, and soon she was feeling tired and weak, and she was suffering from sharp abdominal pains. The pain finally became so intense that she was forced to go to a hospital. A doctor examined her and became alarmed. After taking an X-ray of her stomach, he asked her if she had eaten anything strange lately. "No," replied the woman. "I've barely eaten anything at all since I started taking my diet pills." The doctor asked if he could see the bottle of pills. She gladly obliged and pulled the bottle out of her purse. The doctor then broke one capsule open and brought the contents down to the laboratory to be analyzed. When the doctor returned, he asked the woman to sit down, and he told her that he had some bad news for her. "Ma'am, where did you get these pills from?" "Well, I got them off the internet." "Do you know where these pills came from? Where were they made?" "Oh, I have no idea. I just saw an ad for them and I bought them." "Well, I hate to tell you, ma'am, but these diet pills are full of tapeworm eggs." According to the legend, some years ago, a Russian scientific team were working on a geological drilling project in Siberia. They had managed to drill a hole over 14.5 kilometers depth deep into the crust of the earth when the drill bit suddenly began to rotate wildly. According to the story, the geologists were dumbfounded. They couldn't understand what they had come across. Some members of the team thought that they might have reached the deep center of the earth and thought that it must be hollow. Others believed that they had just come across a deep underground cave. The geologists felt a blast of searing heat gush out of the hole, and they thought they heard faint sounds emanating from the well that they had drilled. They raised the drill and lowered temperature gauges to measure the heat at the bottom of the hole. Once this was done, they got a huge surprise. The temperature, they discovered, was far higher than they had expected. By their calculations, the temperature at the bottom would have to be about 1,100 degrees Celsius, which is over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They were absolutely shocked. It just didn't seem possible. And some of the scientists began to become too afraid to continue on with the project. The most shocking thing was what they found next. They lowered a special microphone into the hole that was designed to withstand the heat. What they heard turned the remaining scientists into nervous wrecks. What they heard was a weak but high-pitched sound. At first, they thought that it was coming from their own equipment, but after some adjustments, they realized that it was actually coming from the Earth's interior. They could hardly believe their ears. The scientists heard human voices screaming in pain. It sounded like thousands, perhaps millions of suffering souls crying and shrieking in unending torture. The horrified scientists realized that they had drilled down and opened up a gateway to hell. After this ghastly discovery, about half of the remaining scientists quit their jobs on the spot and left. They were simply too terrified to go on, fearing that they had accidentally let loose the evil powers of hell upon the Earth's surface. They hoped and prayed that whatever was down there would stay down there. Though this is a great story, it unfortunately is not true. In 1989, Russian scientists working in the Kola Peninsula did manage to drill a hole that was 8 miles deep. They encountered some interesting geological formations, but nothing supernatural. This story was actually made up by a Christian group in Finland and published in the letters page of a newspaper. According to the legend, Pennyland was one of Canada's most popular amusement parks. During the 25 years that it was open, over 200,000 people walked through its gates to enjoy its rides and amusements. However, there was a terrible accident on the Ferris wheel, and several people were killed. Pennyland was forced to shut down, and most of the rides were dismantled. The remaining rides were abandoned and left to fall into disrepair. Many years later, after the park had shut down, the police were called when a dead body was found on the grounds of the old amusement park. They say that a vagrant had collapsed and died of a drug overdose in the toilets. The police, following procedure, made a routine search of the grounds. What they found horrified them. In the building that housed the old Ferris wheel, they discovered 2 rotting corpses. It was the remains of 2 young girls. The policeman who came across the bodies was severely traumatized and allegedly left the force very soon afterwards. One night, a teenage boy was passing by the abandoned amusement park when he noticed that, strangely, some of the lights were still on. Curious, he decided to investigate. As the boy drew closer to one of the buildings, a girl suddenly appeared at the window. According to the boy, there were cuts all over the girl's face, and she was covered in blood. The teenager, reacting on instinct, was about to go inside to help the girl when a strange man emerged from the doorway. He said that the man was carrying a bloody knife. The boy was already frightened, and at seeing this, he began to back away. The crazed man rushed towards the boy, and suddenly, all the lights went out, and the building was plunged into darkness. Scrambling around, looking for something to use to defend himself, the boy picked up a metal pipe. Gripping it tightly, he swung around, ready to fight for his life. And just as quickly as they had gone out, the lights came back on, and the boy was shocked to discover that the man and the girl had both vanished. All that was left was one bloody handprint on the window where the girl had stood before. Rezső Szeres was born in Hungary. In 1933, he was a struggling composer who had never written a hit song. After his girlfriend left him, he was so depressed that he wrote the song that made him famous. The original title, in Hungarian, translated to "The End of the World." The song was later retitled Szomorú Vasárnap, which means Gloomy Sunday. At first, music publishers would have nothing to do with the song, saying that it was just too depressing. Eventually, it was released, and it became a huge success. Delighted that he had finally written a hit song, Rezső contacted the ex-girlfriend who inspired the song and attempted to get back together with her. The very next day, she killed herself by swallowing poison, leaving behind a note with just 2 words written upon it. Those words were Gloomy Sunday. People began to refer to it as the suicide song, and there were rumors that it was cursed. The Hungarian authorities banned the song from being played in public. However, this did not stop the rash of suicides. In Berlin, a young shopkeeper hung herself. Beneath her feet, they found a copy of Gloomy Sunday. In New York, a pretty secretary gassed herself, leaving behind her a request that Gloomy Sunday be played at her funeral. In Vienna, a teenage girl drowned herself while clutching the sheet music. In Budapest, a shopkeeper killed himself and left a note containing the lyrics of the song. In London, a woman took an overdose of pills while listening to the record over and over. The song's eerie reputation quickly spread around the world, and music publishers from America decided to cash in on its notoriety. They released an English translation of the song, and it soon caught on. More deaths followed. One man reportedly walked into a nightclub, asked the band to play the suicide song, and then took out a gun and blew his brains out. An 82-year-old man put Gloomy Sunday on his record player, then jumped to his death from a 7-story window. In Rome, an errand boy was cycling down the street when he heard a beggar humming the tune. The boy stopped pedaling, parked his bicycle, walked over to the beggar, and gave him all of his money, and then he jumped off of a nearby bridge and drowned in the icy waters. In the early 1940s, the song was banned in England because it was deemed too upsetting for the public. The ban was only recently lifted in 2002. Even the song's composer could not escape the curse. Raju Suresh was haunted by all the death and destruction that his music had allegedly caused, saying, "I stand in the midst of this deadly success as an accused man. This fatal fame hurts me. I cried all of the disappointments of my heart into this song, and it seems that others with feelings like mine have found their own hurt in it." In 1968, he committed suicide by jumping out of the window of his Budapest apartment building and falling to his death. Over the years, the song has been recorded by a number of artists, including Billie Holiday, Ray Charles, Sinead O'Connor, Elvis Costello, Sarah McLachlan, Sarah Brightman, Heather Nova, and Bjork. If you decide to listen to this song, please be very careful. All about those wine barrels. There was a married couple in Scotland who inherited an old castle when the husband's grandfather died. Shortly after they moved in, they decided to renovate the old place and hired some builders to work on it. While the builders were cleaning out the basement, they discovered a large barrel of wine amid the clutter. They tried moving it, but found that the barrel was too heavy for them to lift. One of them had the bright idea that they could make the barrel lighter by drinking some of the wine. He talked the others into doing this with him, and they all agreed that the wine had a very peculiar taste. After drinking as much as they could, the workers tapped the barrel and filled some bottles to take home with them. Then, they carried the barrel upstairs and told the owners about their discovery. A few days later, the married couple decided to throw a housewarming party and invited all of their friends. All of the guests drank glasses of wine that were filled from the barrel. By the end of the party, the wine was almost finished. A few guests stayed behind to help the couple clean up. As they were moving the empty barrel of wine to take it downstairs, they noticed that it was still very heavy. The husband decided to investigate, so he went off to fetch a hacksaw from his toolbox. When he cut off the top of the barrel and looked inside, he was horrified. Curled up at the bottom of the barrel was the dead body of an old man. They found out later that it was the corpse of the husband's great-uncle. He had died many years ago in Jamaica, and his wife had arranged for his body to be shipped back to Scotland. Because of the long journey, the body was preserved in wine to prevent it from decomposing. The story goes as follows. There was a group of workers who were transporting a shipment of goods to a university. Among the goods in the back of their van, they noticed a large barrel. One of them was wondering what was inside, so he lifted the lid. Taking a sniff, he was sure that it was rum. The workers, unable to resist temptation, decided to have a drink. Later on that day, when they delivered the barrels to the university, they handed them over to a professor of natural history. The professor opened the barrel in front of the workers, and to their amazement, there was the corpse of a large monkey inside. It had been preserved in alcohol to keep it fresh before it was displayed in a museum. There was a brewery in the United States that imported cheap beer from a foreign country. This beer was transported in large tanker ships. When the ships reached port, the tanks were drained and the beer was then bottled and sent to our stores. During the shipment, the tanks were being drained, when the pipes suddenly became clogged. Workers investigated and found an old boot caught in one of the pipes. They later discovered the body of a dead sailor floating in the beer. After a short investigation, they realized that the man had been murdered. His hands had been cut off, so he couldn't swim or escape when he was thrown into the tank. However, the discovery was made too late to stop the beer being bottled and transported to stores. When this scandal came to light, the brewery went out of business. In 1200 AD, an Arabic historian named Abdel Latif recorded a strange method of embalming that he had discovered on one of his expeditions. According to his story, a group of treasure hunters were excavating a site near the pyramids in Egypt when they unearthed a large, unopened jar which was full of honey. During a lunch break, they opened the jar and dipped their bread into it. They all declared that it was quite a delicious lunch, until one of them discovered a human hair floating in the honey. A quick investigation revealed the preserved corpse of a young child curled up at the bottom of the jar. Well, of course, all of these stories are just urban myths. They never actually happened. However, centuries ago, before the invention of refrigeration, dead bodies that were being transported over long distances were actually sometimes packed in alcohol in order to preserve them. When Admiral Horatio Nelson was killed in the Battle of Waterloo, his corpse was placed in a barrel of rum to keep it from decomposing on the long journey back to England. The barrel was strapped to the ship's mast and kept under guard to stop the sailors on the ship from drinking the alcohol inside. That is a true story. Years ago, there was a road that was known by locals as the Never-Ending Road. Some say it was Lester Road in Corona, California, and others maintain that it was Miette Hot Springs Road in Alberta, Canada. It was a long and winding road, unlit and bordered by a thick forest that led through the mountains. According to legend, many people who drove down the road at night were never seen or heard from again. The legend of the Never-Ending Road became so well known that a lot of folks were even afraid to drive on it during the daylight hours. Some drivers would even lose their nerve and turn back, terrified that if they continued along the road, they would never return. The road took a sharp turn at one point and curved around a large canyon. There were no guardrails on the turn, and on the other side of the canyon, the road continued. One summer, a work crew were widening the road when they made a gruesome discovery. One of the workmen pushed a rock over the side of the canyon and heard it hit something metal. When they climbed down to look, the workmen found dozens of crashed cars at the bottom. They had all fallen to their doom, and the decomposing bodies and skeletal remains of the victims were still strapped into their seats. It was discovered that the roads on either side of the canyon lined up so well that when viewed from the correct angle, especially at night, it created an optical illusion. The canyon was almost invisible, and the road seemed to continue on up and over the hill on the other side of the canyon. People who drove down the road at night had no idea that there was a huge drop-off in front of them until it was too late, and they careened off the cliff and plummeted to their deaths. They say that local law enforcement hushed up the discovery, wanting to avoid a scandal, and that the road was quietly closed down, never to be reopened. The corpses of the dead were never able to be recovered, and they still lie there to this day in their twisted metal graves. Back in the 1940s in San Antonio, Texas, a school bus full of children was making its way down the road and towards the intersection when it stalled on the railroad tracks. A speeding train was coming and smashed into the bus, killing 10 of the children and the bus driver. Since that dreadful accident many years ago, any car stopped near the railroad tracks will be pushed by unseen hands across the tracks to safety. It's the spirits of the dead children, so they say, who push the cars across the tracks to prevent another accident and save people from a tragic fate that mirrors their own. As the story goes, if you park your car directly over the tracks and shift into neutral, the ghost of the children will push it uphill, out of the way of any oncoming train. And if you cover your bumper with baby powder or flour, you can reportedly see the children's fingerprints upon your car. Numerous accounts have been reported that cars do, in fact, inexplicably move on their own and mysterious prints are seen on the vehicles. Others allege that they have heard the voices and laughter of children while at the site. There is a famous photo that you can search for that was said to be taken at the ghost tracks, and it also allegedly shows a ghost at the railway crossing. However, there are no records of any such accident having ever occurred in the newspaper archives anywhere in Texas, and the road is on a slight incline, which could explain the cars moving by themselves. Well, there we have it. Urban Myths Volume 1. We hope that you've all enjoyed this episode. We hope that you found some of these stories, if not all of them, to be rather entertaining. Take care of yourselves until the next time. Eat well, be happy, and have sweet dreams.